film in Minnesota. Today we have a special guest, Matt Cici from Twin Cities Film Fest.
Matt, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this.
Yeah, so this is kind of a interesting time right now that we're in for film, and I guess before we dive into more of the guts of that, tell us how you got involved with Twin Cities Film Fest, first of all.
Yeah, so I got involved with Twin Cities Film Fest pretty early on in my career in film by actually premiering a film there. It was their second year, and that's how I found out about Twin Cities Film Fest. And then several years later, there was an opening for an education coordinator, so someone who would kind of work with the education events. And throughout, I'd say, the past 10, 12 years that I've been involved in film, I'd always found that on any project that I was working on, I would always try to find a way to integrate some sort of education programming in the film that we were making. So whether it was bringing students and offering mentorships on the films that we were working on, or when we would tour the festivals, we would always contact schools ahead of time to try to see if we could do school visits. And so we do those in different cities, which is super rewarding, just being able to share the stories that you have for that production, but also like things that you ran into, so that you hope like, hey, look out for this when you're making your film. And I just think it's something that is something you don't really get a whole lot, but it's incredibly helpful for you when you're starting out, is just to have someone that tells you some advice. So I'd been doing that for quite a long time, and then I just thought that this was a perfect place. Instead of going to all these different venues and setting up shop for a day or 2 days, I could work for an organization that does this all the time. So yeah, that's more or less how I got involved.
So you said that you'd been doing this with kids throughout your filmmaking process anyway. Do you specifically try to reach out to kids of a certain age, like that are already sort of involved in trying to do this, like high schoolers or college students, or do you even go younger than that to try and really reach out to that creativity they have and help spark it? Or
Yeah, at the time that I was doing it on my own, we would most likely hit high schools and colleges, because the opportunities that we were providing were on-set experiences.
Okay.
And so for those ones, it would be more towards that kind of higher education. We did end up doing a few elementary type things for kind of like just starting out learning. And that is a huge part of the education program now for the fest, is for those that we would consider youth, like ages 8 to 12 or something like that. Yeah,
absolutely. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about like what the education programs are this year, like what to expect.
Well, this year I decided to create several programs that were new.
Okay.
I have this awesome like passion for trying to create new things, which creates a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, and it's super rewarding to see the benefits that come out of it. So this year we're introducing our first ever, and it seems like it's a first for a lot of festivals around the world, is a college and career fair. And so with that, we're inviting top colleges from both locally as well as nationally as well, and media companies, nonprofit organizations, art institutions, things like that have opportunities or resources or workshops, maybe internships or classes. And then we're also inviting filmmakers that are working in the industry, have films that are coming up. And so it's what we would consider to be a huge networking event, but also one that if you're interested in pursuing academically film or music or graphic design, it's a good place to meet people and put a face to the name that you'd normally see on a website, admissions counselor, contact. Like, they do a great job already getting to schools, but this makes it a little bit more personal, and it's kind of like a connection hub is what we see it as. So that's our huge event that's taking place on Saturday at noon at the fest.
By the time this posts, it'll probably be over by then, but
yeah, that's okay. You will have heard of it, I'm guessing.
Hopefully you were there.
Yeah, and even if you weren't next year, I'm guessing we're going to have one that's even bigger than this year. Usually that's how it goes. With firsts, it's a pilot, and we hear feedback, and we take that and revise it and make it better. We also have the free day. This is our fourth year for the free day. Essentially, now you could call it free days because we've actually expanded it into a 2-day program.
Awesome.
Where youth ages 8 to 18 actually get invited to watch movies. So they're family-friendly short films, meet the filmmakers who made those films. So there's like 8 filmmakers that will be there for a youth-led Q&A.
Oh, wow.
But they also get to just sit down and chat with them and about the process and like the inspiration behind the story. And so it's a really cool experience for youth. And then they actually will also be able to make a film as well. And so we've done this 3 years, and this will be the 4th. And the filmmaking workshops are 2 hours long, and they make a film from start to finish. So we take them through brainstorming, storyboarding, actually filming it with costumes and props provided by Green Screen Studios, local production company. And then we're going to be editing them together, making music for them, and premiering them all in that 2-hour span.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Wow.
The films that come out are just so incredible. And the individuals that have participated have gone on to shoot some short films afterwards. One 8-year-old made a commercial for a local gym, which is super...
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8-year-old?
Yeah.
Wow.
What have I done with my life? Like, what? That's amazing.
And it's because of that passion discovering it. And one of the big things and big takeaways we have at this event, not only is just to learn about shooting with what you have. So we shoot it all on an iPad. We edit it all on an iPad. So it's one device for all the things.
Oh, cool.
And it's learning those tools that you might have access to at the library, at school, or at a local Apple store. You can kind of just show up and start learning how to do it. But then also, what are the resources that your kid now can take advantage of? And so we try to give resources that are available to them so they can continue those passions throughout the rest of the year. Our goal eventually is to have workshops that will go year round. And so you can always take advantage of the free day.
Absolutely. That's amazing. I like that you do it on the iPad, like showing them that, you don't need to spend all this money. Like you can literally do this with what you have if you have the time and passion for it. That's awesome. That's so cool.
So there are, of course, other events. I don't know how to I'll briefly go over them. We have festival panels. This year we have a panel on Black, the film by David J. Buchanan.
Oh, nice.
And that's focusing on systemic oppression and as well as community organization. We also have a panel on the last weekend of the fest focused on Minnesota Made. So fits really well with the podcast, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
But Minnesota filmmakers learning what the resources are, how they made the films here. And then to finish it off, we have a panel for women in film. And so we've invited 3 women and the president of the Minnesota Women in Film Television, and conversation about making films, what your resources are, and just celebrating the films that are there as well. So we have ed forums, which are new this year. They're kind of like bite-sized learning or TED Talks.
Okay.
They're like 30 minutes long, but there's a presentation and an activity component. And we do school visits year-round. We have some during the fest. We have filmmaker workshops we have access to, and then our Film Fellows program is for college students. Also new this year is high school students and educators. And they go through a curriculum-based program where they watch specific movies. They meet with filmmakers one-on-one, and then they actually will attend educational events. And there's a sort of essay component that goes along with it. And so there's thinking about the films critically in the production world, but then there's also practicum. So they help mentor the youth on that free day. So they're putting that theory into practice, and throughout the rest of the year, they'll actually get lifetime perks through the fest. And we've had a few companies actually specifically reach out to us to hire film fellows, which is amazing. Last year, it was the first year that we did it. And a couple students went on to shoot a feature film that won some awards. A couple students went into, one of them got into UCLA.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty amazing, just based off their experiences. Obviously, there's a lot of work that they put in before that, but it's a huge part of saying, hey, I'm active in the industry, and here's what I'm doing to apply myself.
Absolutely. So you said that there are all those events going on throughout the year. Are there any other like events, or just said events, sort of like the Twin Cities Film Festival, where people can go network and sort of like the Actors Expo that happens early in the year? Like, are there other things like that going on? That you work
Twin
at?
Cities Film Fest does host the Actor Expo, which is available in April. If it's the TCFF specifically, the education programs that we run year-round would be our school visits, looking to expand the free day program to be year-round. And then we also have what was called the mentorship program, which will now be rebranded as career experiences. And those are essentially opportunities where students have the ability to actually shadow someone in the position or field that they're interested in during a film production, or in a company that may be like a colorist, and actually sit down with them and understand the decisions that they're making in that heat of the moment. A lot of times I like to think of, if you're working towards being a cinematographer, or if you're working towards being like a director, it could take you several years to work your way up into that role, especially at a larger production. And so understanding, hey, is this the role that I want? Because now I know what it looks like. And they have a mentor now, and they have someone that they can reach out to. So not only is it networking, but it's also really learning that. And by the way, all of these programs are free. And so there's no cost to admission. There's no cost to participate. And that is a part of our goal to make it as accessible as possible.
How do you manage that?
Yeah, right. Well, we have some amazing sponsors, and so they see the vision that we have. We constantly work on grants, and so we hope in the future to win some grants to help pay for these programs. It's really hard when you're a startup. And I think what we're looking at, the education program for Twin Cities Film Fest, it kind of is a startup. And so, a lot of grants are looking for what's your impact in the community. Now we feel it. We've put in about 150,000 hours of education through this year alone. And this year's not even over yet.
Wow,
And we haven't even talked about all the people that are involved in the festival. And over 1,000 students that we've impacted so far. And so when you look at that, to us, it feels like we've impacted a lot. And so we just have to be really strategic in how we approach those granting foundations, and hope that they see the vision that we do, which is really to sort of change the dynamic and the culture of the film industry to make it something where everybody's voice is heard.
Cool.
That's amazing. Love it. So what got you kind of started in filmmaking and everything to begin with?
Yeah, let's hear about the man behind the education here a little bit. Educate us on you.
So I actually got started kind of in the acting world, and I think it was back in like 8th grade. There was, you do like the popcorn reading in class, so maybe we never did that. I don't know. Maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but
you mean from a book? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, reading from a book, and then it's like popcorn. You read. You read the next sentence, paragraph. So we were doing that during the Diary of Anne Frank, and I was reading, I think, the part of Peter, and it was just one line that I said, and like the whole class laughed, and I didn't realize that it was funny.
Yeah.
And it was just the way that I said it. And I was like, well, that was kind of cool. Like, get a reaction.
Yeah.
And so the next year, I actually applied. Or what would you call, auditioned for a play and made it in, and just kind of like found a love for that sort of performance and acting and whatnot. And my brother and I actually would rent equipment from the Brooklyn Park organization, Northwest Community Television, which shares an office with Cable 12. And they basically say, hey, take a class to learn how to use the equipment. And then you can rent it for free and use our editing studios. The only requirement is that you also put it on our television station. I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty sweet that you're going to give me distribution after you're going to let me check out your equipment for free. And
no kidding.
Yeah, it's a great space. And I think you'll see a lot of the community members who are actually sign up for something like that. There's constantly programs, and people find their passion just for doing something like that. So we would make short films and then play them on the Cable 12 news channel. But it's a pretty awesome experience. So we got started there, and then it just kind of grew, and I started making my own films, and I started acting more in theater and film. So that's kind of how I got started.
Wow.
That's awesome. Do you have a specific type of role on a film set that you prefer? Like, if you could only do one for the rest of your life, like you'd want to be director, writer, actor.
Yeah. Well, I will say that if it's a project that I'm creatively involved in.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if it's a vision that I can share as a part of what it looks like or what it feels like. I do really enjoy that sort of writing, directing, editing sort of roles that are creating the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're writing, it gives birth to it. When you're directing, it's basically reimagining it. And then when you're editing, you're kind of finding the life in the actual clips. And so I think those are some roles that I really aspire to be a part of. But it's really hard to, I guess, do all three roles and maintain something that is creatively diverse in the voice, right? Because a lot of times people get in trouble for doing all of those major roles, and then it's hard to actually find a different voice in the film.
Yeah.
But when I'm not in that creative world, I really find that I enjoy the assistant director role.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that has to do with understanding where a creative wants to be and finding ways to make it so that they can be there. And so if I can figure out what the day-to-day needs to be, which logistics is something I like to do. I like to find all of the holes and make sure that everything's set up for success, so that instead of a director worrying about where they need to be, they can worry about how the performance is, and they can really engage with the actor.
Right.
So I think I really enjoy that role probably the most. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool. And like, I guess from that, I'll kind of jump around here. Who inspires you in film or acting in general that you've kind of drafted from a little bit here and there or whatever?
Oh my gosh, so many people.
Yeah.
But I won't list them all tonight. I would say the directors, I think a lot of times film falls on directors just because they're sort of crafting that vision, are responsible for it. But I would say like director Joachim Trier, who's from Norway. You have Steve McQueen, originally from the UK. Wong Kar-wai from China, and then Lynn Ramsey, also from I think Ireland, UK.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Somewhere up there, yeah.
And primarily just because they have such a good sense of the human condition. A lot of the filmmakers that I mentioned really focus on what that experience is like for the character, and they do just such a wonderful job of illustrating that through cinematography, and communicating their vision through how it's musically crafted and how it's edited. And I think I just am really inspired by human beings and what they do and why they choose what they do. And I think those individuals have such a powerful voice in how we can actually experience ourselves and empathize with others. And so, and I'm just passionate about mental illness and being much more open about what that experience is like. And so I think those people do a really good job and inspire me to constantly create films or stories that are able to do that.
What draws you to mental illness? Why that subject?
Yeah, it's such a misrepresented subject in film and in mass media. And that's actually why I started making films, was at least on the film side. So behind the camera, there was a project in like college that I was working on. It was an extra credit thing. You could choose to make a poster of something that you were reading about in the psychology class. And I asked the teacher, hey, is it all right if I make a film instead of a poster? And he's like, go for it. So I casted, crewed, wrote, directed, edited a short film about schizophrenia. And, you know, I was pretty happy with the results, but it was a week. And so I turned it in, and a couple weeks later, she called me up after class and said, Matt, that was one of the most accurate portrayals of schizophrenia I've ever seen. And I was like, wow. I think you need to do this. And so I took that to heart. And I felt a calling towards really understanding what that experience feels like for someone who's going through something like that, or their family. Because we hear the word crazy and we think about the different terms that are tossed around, or misunderstandings about what bipolar is or what schizophrenia is. And I think for me, that was sort of a calling towards accurately portraying that on film. so that we do have an understanding, so that it is communicated about. And I think that's also why I found a love for education, is like the more that we are able to educate and communicate about things, the less that's going to get confused or skipped over.
Very interesting.
So in that, is there like a piece of work that you've done that is probably your most proud accomplishment, like film that you've made or been a part of to any degree?
Yeah, I think, there's ones that you look back on and they're very hard. I think a lot of filmmakers look back on some of their early films and they just think to themselves like, oh, that was rough. Like, or I don't want to watch it just because. But I would say it's kind of a cop-out answer, and so I apologize for that. But I really do feel like there's a lot that I've experienced in the filmmaking industry. So working for projects where it was incredibly stressful and incredibly hard. But that taught me so much about moving on to the next project or about how I can work with individuals. And so I think I would say like working on all of the projects that I've done, those things have taught me so much. And so I feel proud of struggling through some stuff and working on difficult projects. And I feel incredibly grateful for all the people that I met along the way and who have stayed connected with me. And I'm really excited where I am now. And so if you were to say, like, what are you most proud of? I think making the impact that I'm making now, when that 8-year-old and the mother came to me and said, like, I just want to share with you what she did since last year. And it's just like, you know that you're making a difference.
Right.
But you don't know what that feels like until someone tells you.
Yeah.
And then you just see that huge smile and you're just like,
right.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, what do you like most about making films in Minnesota? And I suppose maybe have you made films outside of Minnesota as well?
Yeah, I've made films both in and outside, mostly in Minnesota, I think just because of proximity. But there were a couple projects I worked on, like one with Andrew Keitlinger in South Dakota. And then I also worked on Spec Script with the Jobs director, Joshua Michael Stern. That one hasn't been made, probably won't be, but it was an amazing experience to work with someone as talented and as connected as he was, and just getting feedback on writing a screenplay like that. As far as inside of Minnesota, I mean, I think the most exciting part about making films here is there's so much as far as the real estate here. When you think about where you can shoot in the middle of a forest, you can shoot it on the lake, you can shoot it in the winter, like every season. And also I think we're starting to understand, and the community is starting to grow as far as diversity and inclusion in the filmmaking world. I think there's a whole lot of room for growth in that conversation, which is part of the reason why I feel so inclined to have those conversations happening at the fest and throughout the festival, is just to continue to have that conversation. It's important. And so I think with that being said too, not only do you have diverse areas to shoot to tell the stories that you want, but you're also now starting to see more individuals who've never had the ability. And so that's, I think, what I love most about Minnesota. I'd really love to see, like most states have government funding. I'd love if we could kind of move in that direction. I also think that finding foundations to help fund film and film artists, and maybe the way around doing that is to connect them with other art forms. I mean, film is such a collaborative medium. We're working with musicians, we're working with writers and sketch artists. You're working with so many different talented individuals, performance arts, theater arts, graphic design, like finding a way to create a collaborative environment so that you're essentially creating funding portions for anyone to create. I don't know, kind of got lost in a tangent there.
No, absolutely. So speaking of like having those conversations repeatedly and how much we need that in order to grow. So with the recent like Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, have you noticed as a filmmaker, or even through education, like any changes that have occurred here in Minnesota? Like, have you noticed that at all, or?
I think you're starting to see more conversations happening. Mickey Southbine is running an ed forum for us called Facing Sexism and Harassment in Our Industry.
That's great.
And she also ran a panel like a month ago at Z Systems with several folks who've experienced that. Right. And I think that's something that we're going to see more often, which is good.
Great. Yeah.
Having that conversation so that people are aware. It kind of leads me back to that previous point of communication and education. I think sometimes we don't realize that people are ignorant to it. In other words, they're turned off. They just never know that it's there. And so if we over communicate about the issues, they might hear that. And then there are those who are offenders of that, and with a constant support system and resources that become available because we're realizing how big of an issue it actually is, because people are starting to talk up about it, that's only going to help it reduce more. Kind of like with mental illness, I was saying, it reduces the stigma the more that you communicate. And so I think with these incredibly necessary conversations of Me Too and Time's Up, equality, diversity, inclusion, those are things that definitely have to happen. And what I'm seeing in Minnesota is people are starting to speak up. And it's important to find those people and support them and find ways to help them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know that that might come up as far as, like, obviously challenges for making a film. Are there other big, like, as a filmmaker too, or as an actor? You can speak to both. That's kind of the nice thing. What do you find is the biggest challenge for you when approaching a film or making a film?
Yeah. Me personally, I don't like to ask for money. So I think for me, that's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because especially if you think about the economy that we're in, and people just don't have the funds. Like, the people that always support you, they're the ones who don't have the money. And so I think for me, that's really hard, because you're trying to make something that means a lot. And that's essentially what I am trying to do, or work on projects that are trying to have that message and send it. And so it's harder for me to ask for funding, but I think that's also difficult for a lot of filmmakers, is finding the funding to do the things that they want to do. And the way that I've combated that, at least, is, especially with some of the programs that we have, is to focus on doing the things you can with what you have, right? Shooting on an iPad, learning that, hey, that smartphone that's in your pocket, or maybe you don't have one, and maybe your friend does. So you have access to one, or a community center, or a local store that has stuff that you can use. Now you have a platform. YouTube did a lot for the industry, is creating a voice for people to upload. If you have access to the internet, now you can tell your story. Now your voice can be heard. It's hard out there because there's so much, but at the same time, that's a very good thing, because there's so much to be exposed to. And so your question about what's maybe like one of the more challenging things, I think, finding the resources can be hard if you don't know where they are. And so
Right.
the way to combat that is find a solution to make sure that everyone knows where the resources are.
Right. And like you said, it's hard to even know if a film will get made, even if it's being produced. So that can be a struggle, really just getting it to the end point.
Yeah. And I think that challenges us a little bit too, to think about the types of stories that we're trying to tell and who's a part of that storytelling process. I'm working on a big project soon now, and one of the strategies that we're taking is making sure that if there isn't someone who, as we know, women have statistically not held the roles of director as many times as a male has. And so if you're hiring a male for that role, for whatever reason, through the interview process, if that's the case, is finding a way to offer a learning experience or an access experience for someone that isn't typically in that role, so that you can, in other words, like a mentorship program, right? So that person now knows what that's like, And the next time that application comes by, you can't say that they don't know how to do that, or that they don't have the resume that stacks up against somebody else. And so not only are you doing that, but now you have a networking. And so this person can recommend that person to something else. I think support groups are incredible too. It's just having conversations and round table discussions. And so I think those are areas that you're able to create that progress and create that change as well.
What do you normally look forward to the most when you get started on a big project, like one that you might have coming up?
Tell us about this project, Matt.
What do I look forward to most? I think, honestly, working with people, and that sounds really weird coming from an introvert, but working with people is so cool. Like, you have an idea, but it gets better when you share it with other people. I think Steve Jobs said something like that. It's just like you're constantly, if you have such a great idea, it's not good to just hold it in. Like, you have to share it because it's only going to get better from there. Someone else is going to bring something to it. And so I think that's something that's really exciting about working on different projects, but also just seeing the community activate around that discussion. And so, like I mentioned, some of the films that I've worked on before, a lot of them had intentional focus on community involvement. And so we would do community events. We would do different things where we would go like into schools, like I mentioned, or bring people on board, or just find ways that people can get involved with the story elements. So if it focuses on mental illness, for example, contacting organizations that focus on that same topic so that they can get involved in the process and tell their members about it and say, hey, check out this story because it's important for you to know. Now you have something that you can share with friends to be able to understand where you're coming from. And so that community activism and really getting people involved is something that I really enjoy. But I think also just that creative vision of the challenges you face on a day-to-day, like any filmmaker will know this, that a day without something coming up is very rare. But it's also, there's something exciting about hitting this wall that now there's an obstacle that you got to figure out before you can get to the next thing. It's just, it's not an experience you get in most places.
So what's next for you?
Again, tell us about this project, Matt.
So there's a project I'm working on with Headwaters Entertainment. They're actually some of the sponsors of the festival this year too.
Nice.
And we're essentially building a workforce in Minnesota by focusing on telling stories about Minnesota's history, Minnesota's culture. And so several of the stories talk about different parts of Minnesota's history, focusing on like the Wilmer 8, for instance, or early Paul Wellstone, and a sheriff up north who was a sheriff for an incredibly long time, the only black sheriff in a community where that's not something that you would normally expect, but also the fact that how is that possible? It was only the only black sheriff,
right.
John Light. And I think that those conversations and, like I said, the community that gets involved in something like that is incredibly inspiring. And so those stories alone are things that definitely need to be told. But also the way that we're going to be doing them is by involving every person from the Minnesota film community, thinking of Minnesota as a place, as a destination for film, creating education avenues for not only for those stories, but then also for them to live once they're off the screen. So having things online for teachers from schools to be able to use in their classroom, so curriculum, but also having public events centered around this. And so it's an incredibly complex project that will last years and years. And it's essentially one that we're constantly looking for feedback from everybody because it's going to involve everybody in the state. So that's what I'm working on right now. Obviously, I'm working with the festival too, and we're continuing to expand that program and find new ways to invite people into the fest, but also just learning what their resources are and really taking those passions and driving them further.
Cool. Is Headwaters Entertainment, is that a local production company or what? Yeah,
it's a local production company. Matt Roy, Nick Swidland, and Tim Saxhog started it.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we've sort of been gaining folks as we've gone to continue growing the actual project itself and all the work behind it.
Oh, wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Matt, I guess we're getting to the end of our time, but where can people find your work or contact you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have the pretty odd thing that my name is fairly unique. So you can find me at Matt Cici pretty much anywhere. MattCici. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, although I don't use Snapchat that much. And then obviously you can find me on the website for Twin Cities Film Fest or mattcici.com. And where you can find all the education programs, twincitiesfilmfest.org, but also tcffeducation.org. And so that's where all the education programs are listed as well.
And that's part of your pilot setup that you have going now this year, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got all of those programs listed there, including the pilot programs, or the ones that are the first year in progress.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
And then the Film Fest goes from the 17th through the 27th?
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
17th through 27th. And if this comes after that, there'll still be education programs. Like I said, we do year-round stuff, and we'll always have a festival too. So you can come next year.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been awesome learning about the film festival and about you and what you've done so far. And it sounds really fascinating. So
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been awesome having a conversation. Likewise.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt, for coming on, and we'll see you guys in 1 week this time.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Have a good one.